Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Writers Corner live show. Here on the Writers Corner live show, we connect authors to each other and we help readers find new authors to love. Now, you probably already have your favorite type of book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, but you never know. We may always just introduce you to your new favorite genre to love or help you discover new books and authors that you don't know. On the show, you will meet seasoned as well as new authors. Some of our seasoned authors share their tips and tricks of how to get published right the first time, and you get to hear the backstory straight from the horse's mouth. So if you're just joining us, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Bridgetti Banda. I'm a global goodwill ambassador and a live streaming advocate who loves to help brands, entrepreneurs, and authors tell their stories and have a great online experience. My co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson, is an award-winning author of the Poolicious children's book series, and she's unable to join us today. She'll be back again next week. So my amazing guest today is Rachel Cline. Rachel is the author of novels What to Keep as well as My Liar, and has written for the New York Times, New York More, Self, and Tin House magazines. She is a produced screen and television writer. For 5 years, she was a screenwriting instructor at the University of Southern California and has taught fiction writing at New York University, Eugene Lang College, and Sarah Lawrence College. She is a resident at Yaddo. I'm hoping I pronounced that correct. I'll ask her just now. A fellow at Sewanee and a Girls Right Now mentor. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, a few blocks from where she grew up. So let's not waste any more time and bring on our featured author for today, Rachel Cline.
Hi.
Rachel, hello. A huge, big welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
It's a big, big pleasure. Very honored to have you as a guest. I always like to ask authors, what is it that got you into writing? Because we all have a story within us, but it isn't enough to get us to put pen to paper and become an author. What was it that drove you to feel so compelled that you wanted to become an author?
Well, it's really been a lifelong ambition of mine. I mean, I think partly my mother was an author. When I was a little girl, she was writing a book about the birth of quantum mechanics. And so I was very aware that something more important than me was happening in the other room. And then I think I first realized the ambition to be a writer when I read Harriet the Spy, a grade school book. And the main character is a 10-year-old who keeps a notebook. And I sort of thought, all those narrative thoughts in my head could actually be something. It took me until I was 45 to actually attempt writing a novel. But it's been a lifelong goal.
That is absolutely awesome. And who was your main supporter? Because, when you're writing, it's quite an intense process and we all need some form of inspiration. Who was your main source of inspiration and someone that just kept you going in your journey?
I believe that was me. I have not had a mentor or, I for a while I had an agent, a lovely woman named Nina Collins, who sort of discovered me. That happened in my late 40s. And she was enormously helpful. And certainly there have been people along the way who have been dear and supportive. Many people, but I never had that sort of one champion.
And did you weigh up the pros and cons of self-publishing, or did you immediately think, well, I just need to go to a publisher?
Well, my first two novels were with a Random House, and we never got, they bought it pretty much overnight, and so the question never entered my mind. My third novel, which just came out, I had a miserable time selling, never actually sold it in terms of money being exchanged. And I did seriously consider self-publishing, and I will probably consider it even more seriously next time. The world has changed so much. And on this book, I wound up, all the editorial work I paid for myself, all of the publicity I paid for myself, and did myself. I hired people, but having a publisher isn't necessarily.
Was that kind of, I see a general sort of theme going through speaking to so many different authors. Was that a bit of a rude awakening when you got published and sort of realized, well, the fact that I have a publisher doesn't mean I can sit back and fold my arms and the money will just come rolling in?
Certainly, it was a rude awakening, and it continues to be a rude awakening. I think the rudest awakening is that it can't be about money. Some people make money, and that's fantastic, but it's very rare.
So what would you say should be your main driver when you decide to become an author? Because it's certainly not the money necessarily.
I think it's got to be you have a story to tell, or maybe you don't know when you start out what the whole story is, the beginning, middle, and an end. Often lost you there for a second. If you know that you have a voice in your head that tells stories, then you are compelled to write.
Right. No, absolutely. Now, your book, Question of Authority, is quite intriguing. And the reason I say that is because very often you can grow up. I don't know, do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother.
Right. So very often when you look at siblings and you look at their stories and you look at how they grow up, and if they talk about their experience growing up, you sometimes wonder, did these people grow up in the same house?
Right.
Did they even have the same parents?
Right.
Because you experience life through your own eyes, through your own experience, and it depends on where in the food chain you were born. What was that period that you grew up with? Everything impacts on your story. And so here's now a story where it's yourself and a friend that
Right.
went through a joint kind of experience. How was that?
Well, just to be clear, both the title of the book is The Question Authority, not A Question of Authority, which is just to explain that there's a button that people in the US wear called Question Authority, and it's a command. It means you should question the people in authority because they may be leading you astray. As a young person, I had a teacher who wore this button, and I didn't understand that question was a verb. I thought it was a noun, and I thought he was saying...
There we go, I fixed it. The question authority, that's correct,
Thank you,
right?
That's correct, yes. I thought that his button meant that he was the authority on all questions and answers. And that misunderstanding is sort of a theme of the book, because it's about this teacher's influence on the girls he taught. Also, just wanted to clarify, it's not me. It's a narrator named Nora Bookbinder. She has some things in common with me and many things not.
So I wanted to ask you, I always like to ask authors as well, is there any correlation between the character and you? Are there some of your traits in there that's kind of woven into the character?
Certainly. I think it took me 10 years to write this book, not counting the first 20 where I was just processing the experiences that I had in 7th and 8th grade. And the sort of eureka moment was when I started writing in my own voice. I had been writing the third person, and I put my own voice into the character, and suddenly I knew what I was doing. So she certainly has that, and she has some elements of my history. She has this teacher that I had who was sexually inappropriate with his students who were 13 and 14 at the time. And she has a former best friend who, from that time, who reappears in her life. This did not happen to me. And she has a job in the bureaucracy of the New York City Department of Education, somewhat like the job I had 10 years ago, settling lawsuits. And that becomes the sort of the motor of the book, is the settlement of a lawsuit.
So would you say that writing the book was some sort of therapy for you?
Well, I have a lot of therapy that I do and pay for. So in addition to that, sure. I mean, I think writing is a therapeutic thing. I think a lot of, for me, my whole life, I mean, going back to your first question, how I understand the things that happen to me and how I want to deal with them and what I believe, I often have to do by running it into writing.
And so your journey as an author of this particular book, how did you find putting your thoughts together? Did you write as you remembered things happening and then putting the story together? Or did you sort of do time blocking and decide, well, I'm going to now, write, I'm going to spend the day writing? Or did you find you were better in the morning, afternoon, evening? How did you do it?
Well, long ago, before this book, I had a sort of revelation when I was turning 40, I think, that I wanted to write a book, but no one was ever going to ask me to write a book. If I wanted to do it, I had to figure out how. And I've always had a job, a 9-to-5 job. Well, usually more than 9 to 5. And at the time, I'd been at the place I was working for a few years and had a good relationship with my employers. And I asked if I could come in late on Fridays. And I found that I could, if I worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday mornings, it was enough momentum to then take 4 days off and feel like I had something to come back to. So I do work in the morning. And I generally don't work for more than 2 hours at a sitting. The first project I had been writing for film, and the first attempt to write a novel that I gave myself was I actually took a screenplay that I had written and turned it into a novel, or fictionalized it. It wasn't even a novel yet. I knew I had a good character, and I started just trying to turn that into prose.
How was the writing experience different, writing a novel from doing a movie screenplay? What's the difference?
Different. Well, a screenplay is really a product, and you start with structure. You start with, beginning, middle, and end, and story beats. You have to sort of know what's going to happen all along. You need a protagonist and an antagonist, and it's dramatic structure. When I used to teach it, I used to make the students read Aristotle's Poetics, partly just so that they could say that they'd read Aristotle's Poetics, but also because it really is relevant still. Writing a novel, the world is your oyster. You can do anything. It doesn't have to have a conventional plot, and it doesn't have to have conventional characters. The books I like to read are books that make you want to turn the pages. So I try to have a plot, but I always start thinking I know what the story is, but that never winds up being the finished product.
Yeah. So for anyone that wants, I mean, you've now had both experiences doing movies and writing a novel. So if anyone sort of thinks, well, I've written a novel, can I also do movie work? Is that possible? Do you have to have specific training to do that?
I don't think you need specific training. I do have a degree in screenwriting, and it was a great experience, but I don't think I learned anything in that program that I couldn't have learned by reading a book. Yeah. However, getting paid to do it is a whole other matter. I mean, I think that's virtually impossible.
So getting back to the question of authority, your characters in the book completely fictional, or are they actually based on the characters in the story?
Well, can I say both?
Yes, you can.
They are completely fictional. I mean, I spent 10 years writing it. That was an act of imagination and considerable revision and study. And certainly the character of the molesting teacher is very much based on the teacher I had in 7th and 8th grade. And the character of Beth, the best friend from childhood who returns, there are flashbacks to the childhood, and those are very much based on my own memories. The current envisionment of the character Beth is completely fictional because I don't know what happened to that girl that I was friends with.
Yeah. And do you hide anything in the book that people who don't know you well won't notice?
Ask me that again in a different way.
Is there anything that you hide in the story that only people that know you well would recognize?
That's a very probably. I know that in my first 2 books, I didn't realize that I had put Beatle lyrics somewhere in the story, and somebody pointed that out to me. I don't think there's one in this book, but who knows? There's certainly the book is set in this neighborhood in Brooklyn where I now live and where I grew up. And so for anyone who's lived here or gone to school here or
they'd resonate with the story.
I think there's a lot of little details. I mean, there's a character who's the guy who owns the pet food store down the street, and he's a neighborhood fixture. Everybody who lives here and he's been here for 30 years, so everybody knows him. There was even a little article about him in the New York Times yesterday. And so, for people who know Sammy, to encounter him in the book as a character is, I think, kind of fun.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So when it came to editing your book,
mm-hmm.
Did you have a hard time choosing an editor, and how did your relationship with the editor go? Because I know some people get along well with the editors and some people have a love-hate relationship with the editor.
I'm always so grateful for any editorial feedback. I've never hated an editor. I've only been grateful. But I in the course of those 10 years, I hired many editors, probably 3 or 4, and learned different things from each of them. On my first 2 books with the conventional publisher, I had a real editor, someone who stayed for the life of the book and read multiple drafts. And, that's the greatest thing a writer can have. And it's a tragedy that it's not really even done by the conventional houses anymore. I don't, unless you're at the top of their list.
Yeah. Rachel, hindsight's always a great thing. If you look at what you've accomplished now, do you wish you started to write earlier in your life, or do you feel you became an author at the right time?
At the right time. I didn't have anything to say when I was 20. I wanted to be a writer then, and I tried. I mean, I even did an independent study my last semester at college to become a writer, and you know, I wasn't there yet. I think it took a lifetime. Well,
Yeah.
the first.
And your writing style, do you write longhand? Do you write it down, do you physically write, or do you type on your computer, or did you combine both?
I've done all in my life. I'm old enough that I started with a manual typewriter, but for a long time for writing screenplays, I always used a computer because of the format. It's just so much easier. And then when I started writing fiction, I started actually writing longhand to some extent as a way to psych myself out, to not take it too seriously, not to feel James Joyce hovering over me, but to just be like a little person writing in their notebook. And then in recent years, my hands hurt, my wrists hurt, my back hurts. So I've started, I write a first draft in longhand, and then I dictate it into my phone, which sucks it into notes, which I then email to myself so I can edit in Word or what's it called? Scrivener.
I've not heard anyone do that before. And what was that like? Are there a lot of errors, or do you find it's pretty accurate?
It's hilarious. Some things it's a genius about. Like, it knows how to spell Beyonce without you telling it. But things that are your own sort of more idiosyncratic expressions, it's terrible at. But that's okay, because I'm using that first pass as a way to cut my own repetitions and lousy phrasing, and I cut an enormous amount just in that first transition.
Yeah. So now that you are an accomplished author, what would your advice be to someone who wants to start their first book?
You gotta just start. You can't wait for somebody to ask you. You can't wait till you're ready, because you're never going to be ready because it's too intimidating. You just have to go. And I think many more of us have a book in us than necessarily commit to it. And the other thing is, you have to accept that it's going to take time, and you have to revise. It's not going to be one and done. But if you come to enjoy that, it's very rewarding.
Oh, wonderful. So where can people find your books?
Well, they're all available on Amazon in one form or another. The first two are, out of print, but can be had for $1. And often in public libraries. The newest one just came out in April, and so it's like $10 on Amazon. It's very affordable. And it's also in the U.S., starting to be in libraries. If you are in the U.S., please go ask your public library to acquire one, or your local bookseller. It's available through the normal channels that they order books from.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and a little bit about your book. Each week is such an adventure learning because everyone's journey as an author is completely different.
Yep.
My last question to you, what would be your advice to your younger self?
Oh, sigh. Maybe stop waiting for somebody to give you permission, because it's not going to happen and you don't need it.
Wonderful. Rachel, thank you so much. It was awesome having you as a guest today. And we hope you'll join us again sometime in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Bridgetti. Nice to meet you.
It's a big pleasure. Likewise.
Bye.
Bye, everyone, and thank you for joining us today.